But what else we got going on this week?
Yeah, so we have a fact check from CNN of President Biden, speaking of Biden, that I know you contributed on. He made a series of false statements, as he's wont to do, about firearms. And CNN came out and kind of step-by-step refuted some of the falsehoods that he uttered. And I know you contributed on a few. So, for example, one of them, he said the NRA itself is immune from lawsuits somehow, which is news to us, right? That we've been covering all these lawsuits that the NRA is facing. It's surprising that he would say that, but clearly that's false.
Yeah, that's certainly not true. It seems like he kind of, for a number of these, it feels like he kind of garbled his usual talking points, because usually what the president will say is, one, that the gun industry is totally immune from lawsuits, which is not true either. Right. I believe that's also in this fact check. It's not true. They have liability protections for kind of very similar to what most industries have, which is basically you can't sue the company for the misuse of the criminal misuse of its product by a third party if they weren't directly involved in any way. Right. That's basically what the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act says. And so the president likes to say that you can't sue gun manufacturers. You can sue gun manufacturers. They get sued all the time. SIG is being sued right now over safety questions. Taurus has been sued for similar things. Remington's been sued for the triggers and the Remington 700. Yeah, there's a lot of, if there's a product defect, a design defect, you can sue just like you could over basically any product. So he says that a lot. He makes this claim that the industry is not able to be sued and has extraordinary protections that no other industry has, which is also not true. And then he'll also say that he's the only one who can take on the NRA, and he's defeated the NRA before, and he'll defeat him. Like, that's another common talking point. And I guess he just sort of mashed them both together and got this new lie, which is just not true. The NRA, like you said, we've covered it a bunch. They've been sued by a lot of people and are continuing to be sued by the state of New York, by the Washington, D.C.'s attorney general, by former donors. The list goes on. They don't have any sort of special liability protection.
Right. And then apropos of our last segment, he also said that pistol braces, he says, when you attach a pistol brace to a pistol, it turns it into a gun. And then it also gives it a higher caliber bullet once you put that piece of plastic, which is not true.
Yeah. I mean, that one, I feel like you can just say, this is just gibberish at this point. None of this is remotely true. The pistol brace is a brace. It doesn't change the firearm at all. It just allows you to strap it to your wrist or forearm and makes it a little bit easier to shoot the gun one-handed. You can also press them against your shoulder if you want to. They're not designed and intended to be used that way, but that is the thing that makes them controversial, is that people will do that with them. But regardless, it doesn't change the actual firearm in any way. It doesn't change how it shoots. It doesn't change what caliber of ammunition it uses. So, the president is just, it's hard to even try and discern what he's trying to say with that one.
Yeah. And then another one that I kind of like, because it's a variation on one that he's liked to do a lot in the past that he's been fact checked on, where, traditionally he says things like, the Second Amendment doesn't let you own cannons, and you can. Well, this time he says machine guns. He said, first of all, he said he phrased it in such a way to suggest that the Second Amendment, the text of the Second Amendment itself, spells out certain weapons that are prohibited, which of course the Second Amendment is silent on types of weapons.
Right.
But then he says you can't own a machine gun, which is a little more complicated than that, because you actually can, in fact, own machine guns.
Yeah, you can, and you always have been able to. Now, there are regulations. This again goes back to the National Firearms Act. We're talking a lot about the National Firearms Act in this segment because it's relevant to the pistol brace situation and also to the machine gun situation, which now machine guns are a little bit different than everything else in the NFA, because in 1986, Congress did pass a law that banned new sales of machine guns, of fully automatic weapons, to the public. And so you can't buy new ones today as a civilian, but you can buy all the ones that were registered before 1986, which is, there's several 100,000 of those out there. They're very expensive, but it's certainly not illegal to own them. I mean, and same thing for cannons. It's actually even more true for cannons because, the cannons that existed at the founding weren't regulated and still aren't regulated today. You can buy a black powder cannon without any sort of regulation. Really, you can buy them off eBay,
right,
if you want to. They're not very popular anymore, but they're certainly legal, and they were certainly legal at the founding. You could own a warship at the founding if you wanted to, the equivalent of a 19th century or 18th century battleship. You could own. People did. That's what privateers were. That's how the Navy got started, right? John Paul Jones, he owned his own ship. That was a private enterprise. Anyway, yeah, the president's knowledge of the founding era gun regulations is not very expansive, and it's often incorrect. Right.
And then the last falsehood was a little more forgivable, but still a little bit, he exaggerated. He claimed that his late son, Beau Biden, was the first person to use a red flag law.
Right.
He was previously the Attorney General of Delaware. And the problem with this is while he was a proponent of red flag legislation and he tried to get one introduced, the red flag law didn't exist until after Beau Biden had passed away. So first of all, red flag laws have existed since the 90s. So whether or not he would have been the first is not, wouldn't have been possible. But he also had sadly passed away before that was even on the books. So,
yeah, I mean, this one, the president makes a lot of incorrect statements about his late son for some reason. He claims that he died in Iraq, which isn't true either. Now, the red flag law in Delaware is named after Beau Biden.
Right.
So maybe that's where this is coming from. But yeah, certainly it's not true. And so it's, just another pretty straightforward falsehood on the president's part here.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the 5 latest from the president that you contributed to.
I think there was one more, right? About there was one about the law that he signed last year. And this one wasn't, I think it was even less egregious than the other ones. But he claimed that there was no
the boyfriend
no way
loophole.
That domestic abusers can't buy guns at all now, period. And I guess the quibble with that is that while the law that he signed last year did expand the definition of domestic abuser to include people who were dating partners, it also included a provision that allowed people to regain their gun rights if they didn't reoffend within 5 years.
Yeah.
So that was the one caveat to that claim as well.
That's right. Yeah.
So, they kind of got less and less severe as you sort of go down the list, but and more comprehensible as to how he got to the falsehood. But yeah, the president, he talks about guns a lot more often than we write about him talking about guns, and a big reason for that is he just kind of uses the same anecdotes over and over again and makes the same claims, often false claims over and over again. Not that this is unique to Joe Biden. Politicians do this all the time. They have a stump speech that they go out and give, and they hit the same points over and over again. And so it's just of diminishing news value, I think. The 15th time he uses the F-15 anecdote about how, actually, I think that's one of his more disturbing ones, honestly, because he talks about the Tree of Liberty, which is a Jefferson quote, right? The Tree of Liberty was to be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And he says this is an absurd idea, basically, because you need more than an AR-15 to defeat the government. You'd need F-15s or what have you. And, it's not, I think, a great look for the president of the United States to be out there talking about how the government could crush the people if it wanted to. But regardless, he uses that all the time. Basically, every time he talks about guns, he'll say the same 3 or 4 things. We cover that fact check covers a number of them, but that's part of the reason we don't cover everything he says about firearms, because it's just a lot of it's repeated, and it doesn't. He calls for the assault weapons ban like every other week,
Right.
And unless there's some significant change in Congress, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So it doesn't really make sense for us to go out and write about it every single time he says something. Just to explain it for the listeners and readers, how we sort of approach the president and his comments on guns. If it's something new and newsworthy, generally speaking, that's when we'll go and cover something he says. But